Arrogant rich defendant refuses to stand for black judge. The sentence he receives stuns everyone. The courtroom buzzed with a hushed anticipation. Sunlight sliced through the tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Polished mahogany gleamed, reflecting the anxious faces of the spectators. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and the unspoken weight of justice. Every seat was filled, and the gallery was packed with a mixture of curious onlookers and concerned citizens. News reporters, armed with notepads and furrowed brows, scribbled furiously, capturing every detail of this high-profile case. Julian Devereux, the heir to a vast fortune, sat at the defendant's table, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the sterile environment. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of boredom, but a flicker of disdain danced in his eyes. He tapped his manicured fingers impatiently on the table, a subtle display of his contempt for the proceedings. This is all a ridiculous charade, he thought, his internal monologue laced with arrogance. A mere formality before I return to my life. These people, this place, they're all beneath me. He glanced at his expensive watch, a silent reminder of the time he was wasting. He smirked inwardly, confident that his wealth and influence would shield him from any real consequences. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom as Judge Eleanor Thompson entered. Her presence commanded respect, her gaze piercing and unwavering. Even Julian felt a momentary flicker of unease, a fleeting premonition that this might not be the walk in the park he envisioned. As she took her seat, a court officer announced her arrival, the words echoing through the silent room. Julian remained seated, a deliberate act of defiance, a silent challenge to the authority of the court. The air seemed to crackle with tension as Judge Thompson's eyes met Julian's, a silent battle waged across the room. A bead of sweat trickled down Julian's temple, a subtle sign that his carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. This brazen act of disrespect, this seemingly minor infraction, would soon set in motion a series of events that would shatter Julian's world and leave everyone in the courtroom stunned. The gavel fell, a sharp, decisive sound that cut through the silence, signaling the beginning of a trial unlike any other. Inciting incident. As Judge Thompson settled into her seat, she fixed her gaze on Julian. "Mr. Devereux," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I believe it is customary to stand when the court is in session." Julian smirked, a barely perceptible movement of his lips. He remained seated, his eyes locked on hers, a silent declaration of war. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he drawled, his voice dripping with condescension, "I find myself quite comfortable. And frankly, I don't see the need for such antiquated rituals." The courtroom gasped. Julian's lawyer, a seasoned professional named Mr. Abernathy, shot him a look of pure horror. He knew this blatant display of arrogance was a grave mistake, a direct insult to the judge and the entire justice system. He cleared his throat nervously. "Your Honor, I apologize for my client's indiscretion. He's under a great deal of stress." Judge Thompson's expression didn't change. "Mr. Abernathy, your client will address the court directly. Mr. Devereux, I am instructing you to stand." Julian remained seated, his face now flushed with defiance. "I refuse," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet every word echoed through the silent courtroom. "I will not stand for you or this ridiculous charade." Judge Eleanor Thompson, a woman of immense integrity and unwavering principles, had dedicated her life to the pursuit of justice. She had overcome countless obstacles to reach her position, facing prejudice and discrimination at every turn. She was known for her fairness, her wisdom, and her unwavering commitment to the law. This case, and Julian's blatant disrespect, struck at the very core of her beliefs. She had seen firsthand how wealth and privilege could corrupt the system, and she was determined not to let it happen in her courtroom. Mr. Abernathy, Julian's lawyer, was a man caught between his loyalty to his client and his respect for the court. He knew Julian was guilty of the charges against him, embezzlement and fraud, but he was bound by his professional duty to defend him. He also knew that Julian's arrogance was his own worst enemy, and he feared that it would ultimately lead to his downfall. He had warned Julian repeatedly to show respect for the judge, but his warnings had fallen on deaf ears. Now, he could only watch in dismay as Julian dug himself deeper and deeper into a hole. The stakes were high for everyone involved. For Julian, it was about more than just the charges against him. It was about maintaining his image, his power, and his control. He believed that his wealth entitled him to special treatment, and that he was above the law. If he were convicted, it would shatter his carefully constructed world and expose him for the fraud he was. For Judge Thompson, it was about upholding the integrity of the justice system and ensuring that everyone, regardless of their wealth or status, was held accountable for their actions. She knew that this case would be closely watched and that her decision would set a precedent for future cases. If she allowed Julian's arrogance to go unchecked, it would send a message that the wealthy could buy their way out of justice. For Mr. Abernathy, it was about his reputation and his career. If he failed to defend Julian adequately, it would tarnish his image and jeopardize his prospects. He was trapped in a moral dilemma, forced to defend a man he knew was guilty while also trying to uphold the principles of justice. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, a silent battle raging between wealth and power, justice and integrity. Judge Thompson, maintaining her composure, addressed Julian again. "Mr. Devereux, your refusal to stand is a direct violation of courtroom decorum and a blatant sign of disrespect. I am now holding you in contempt of court. You will be fined $10,000. Julian scoffed. $10,000? That's pocket change, Your Honor. He pulled out a wad of bills from his wallet and tossed it onto the table. There. Now, can we get on with this farce? The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed. Mr. Devereux, your behavior is becoming increasingly disruptive. I am now ordering you to be taken into custody. You will be held in contempt until you agree to abide by the rules of this court. Two bailiffs approached Julian, their faces grim. He resisted, struggling against their grasp. You can't do this, he yelled, his voice laced with panic. I'm Julian Devereux. You can't treat me like this. The bailiffs wrestled him to the ground, handcuffing him as he continued to shout and struggle. They dragged him out of the courtroom, his protests echoing through the halls. The courtroom was in chaos. Spectators whispered among themselves, reporters scribbled furiously, and Mr. Abernathy stared in disbelief. He knew that Julian had crossed a line, that he had sealed his fate. Judge Thompson banged her gavel, restoring order to the court. This court is now in recess, she announced. We will reconvene tomorrow morning. As Julian sat in his jail cell, his anger began to subside, replaced by a growing sense of fear. He had never been in a situation like this before. He was used to getting his way, to having his money and influence pave the way for him. But here, behind bars, he was just another inmate. He called his lawyer, desperate for help. Abernathy, get me out of here, he demanded. This is ridiculous. I can't spend the night in jail. Abernathy's voice was grim. Julian, you've made a serious mistake. You've insulted the judge, and you've shown a complete lack of respect for the court. I can try to get you released, but you need to apologize to Judge Thompson. You need to show her that you understand the gravity of your actions. Julian scoffed. Apologize? To her? Never. I'd rather rot in this cell. Abernathy sighed. Then I can't help you, Julian. You've left me with no choice. He hung up the phone, leaving Julian alone in his cell, his anger and fear growing with each passing minute. Meanwhile, Judge Thompson received a series of threatening phone calls at her home. The caller, his voice distorted, warned her to drop the case, to let Julian go. He's a powerful man, the caller said. You don't want to make him an enemy. You'll regret it. Judge Thompson remained unfazed. She had faced threats before, and she would not be intimidated. She reported the calls to the authorities, but she refused to back down. Julian, stripped of his wealth and power, began to see the world in a different light. He realized that his arrogance and entitlement had blinded him to the consequences of his actions. He had always believed that he was above the law, that he could get away with anything. But now, He was facing the very real possibility of prison. He began to question his choices, his values, and his entire way of life. He started to understand the pain and suffering he had caused others through his greed and corruption. Judge Thompson, despite the threats and the pressure, remained steadfast in her commitment to justice. She refused to be swayed by wealth or power, and she was determined to see justice served. She knew that this case was about more than just Julian Devereux. It was about upholding the principles of equality and fairness under the law. She drew strength from her past experiences, from the challenges she had overcome, and from her unwavering belief in the power of justice. The trial resumed the next morning, the courtroom packed with spectators and reporters. Julian, still defiant, was brought in, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He refused to make eye contact with Judge Thompson, his face a mask of anger and resentment. The prosecution presented their case, detailing Julian's embezzlement and fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, and Julian's defense was weak. Abernathy did his best, but he knew that the case was lost. As the trial drew to a close, Judge Thompson addressed Julian directly. "Mr. Devereux," she said, her voice calm but firm, "you have been found guilty of embezzlement and fraud. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and your behavior throughout these proceedings has been nothing short of disgraceful. You have shown a complete lack of respect for this court, for the law, and for the principles of justice." Julian scoffed. "This is a kangaroo court," he yelled. "You're all just jealous of my success." Judge Thompson ignored his outburst. "I have taken into consideration the severity of your crimes, your lack of remorse, and your blatant contempt for this court. I have also considered the impact your actions have had on the victims of your fraud, the families and individuals who have been financially ruined by your greed." The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Judge Thompson. The tension was almost unbearable. Shocking revelations. Just as Judge Thompson was about to deliver the sentence, a gasp rippled through the courtroom. A woman stood up in the gallery, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling, "I have something to say." Judge Thompson nodded, allowing her to speak. "My name is Sarah Miller," the woman said. "I am Julian Devereux's sister." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Julian stared at his sister in disbelief. He had not seen her in years. They had been estranged since their father's death when Julian had cheated her out of her inheritance. "Julian," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion, "I know you've done terrible things. But I also know that there's still some good in you. Please, just apologize. Show some remorse. It's not too late to change." Julian stared at his sister, his expression unreadable. He hesitated for a moment, as if considering her words. But then, his face hardened. "Get out of here, Sarah," he said, his voice cold. "You're embarrassing me." Sarah shook her head sadly. "I tried, Julian," she said. "I did." She sat down, her face buried in her hands. Judge Thompson, having witnessed this exchange, seemed to steel herself. "Mr. Devereux," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "I have heard enough. I am now ready to deliver your sentence. For the crimes of embezzlement and fraud, I sentence you to 20 years in prison. Furthermore, for your contempt of court and for your continued refusal to show respect for this court, I am adding 5 years to your sentence. You will serve a total of 25 years in prison." The courtroom gasped. Julian stared at Judge Thompson in disbelief. 25 years? He stammered. "You can't do that. You're ruining my life." Judge Thompson remained unmoved. "Mr. Devereux," she said, "you ruined your own life. You had everything, and you threw it all away with your greed and arrogance. You have shown a complete disregard for the law, for the people you have harmed, and for the principles of justice. This sentence is a just and fitting punishment for your crimes." She banged her gavel, signaling the end of the trial. Julian was led away, screaming and protesting, his world crumbling around him. The news of Julian's sentence spread like wildfire. The media was in a frenzy, reporting every detail of the trial and the shocking verdict. People across the country celebrated Judge Thompson's decision, praising her courage and her commitment to justice. The victims of Julian's fraud felt a sense of vindication, knowing that he would finally be held accountable for his actions. Sarah Miller, Julian's sister, visited him in prison. She found him a changed man, humbled and remorseful. He apologized for the pain he had caused her and for cheating her out of her inheritance. She forgave him, offering him a glimmer of hope in his darkest hour. Mr. Abernathy, Julian's lawyer, reflected on the case with a sense of sadness and regret. He knew that he had done his best to defend Julian, but he also knew that Julian's arrogance had ultimately led to his downfall. He resolved to be more selective about the clients he represented in the future to ensure that he was always upholding the principles of justice. Judge Thompson returned to her chambers, exhausted but satisfied. She knew that she had made the right decision, that she had upheld the law and protected the integrity of the justice system. She also knew that she had made an enemy of a powerful man and that she would likely face more challenges in the future. But she was prepared to face those challenges, knowing that she was on the side of justice. She sat at her desk, gazing out the window at the city skyline. She thought about the countless individuals who relied on the justice system to protect them, to ensure that they were treated fairly and equally under the law. She knew that her job was not always easy, but it was always necessary. She was a guardian of justice, a defender of the weak, and a champion of the truth. The prison walls loomed large and gray, a stark contrast to the opulent world Julian once inhabited. His cell was small and bare, the only furnishings a metal cot and a thin mattress. The sounds of other inmates echoed through the halls, a constant reminder of his isolation and confinement. Judge Thompson's chambers were quiet and serene, filled with the scent of old books and the soft glow of lamplight. The walls were lined with legal texts and historical documents, a testament to the enduring power of the law. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, a symbol of hope and opportunity, a reminder of the world that Julian had lost. Sarah Miller's face was etched with sadness and compassion, her eyes filled with tears as she looked at her brother. She reached out and took his hand, offering him a gesture of forgiveness and reconciliation. Years passed. Julian, transformed by his prison experience, dedicated himself to helping other inmates. He studied law, became a model prisoner, and eventually earned his parole. He emerged from prison a changed man, humbled and remorseful, determined to make amends for his past misdeeds. Judge Thompson continued to serve on the bench, facing new challenges and upholding justice with unwavering resolve. She remained a beacon of integrity, inspiring others to strive for a more just and equitable society. The system, however, remained flawed, and new battles awaited. The moral reflection: ultimately, the story serves as a powerful reminder that no one is above the law and that even the wealthiest and most powerful individuals must be held accountable for their actions. Justice may be blind, but it is also unwavering, and it will always prevail. The weight of arrogance can crush even the most privileged, while humility and remorse can offer a path to redemption.